Hey everybody, Hostron here with another Star Wars Destiny video. Today we're going to do the first video in what I hope to be a series of videos going forward, which I'm going to call Theory Crafting. Basically with these videos, what the purpose of them is we're going to take a deck that has been either a top performer or outright dominating force in the the current meta that we have right now, which is the across the galaxies meta. So essentially the last meta that we will have before rotation. So what the purpose of these theory crafting videos is we're going to take one of these dominant decks, we're going to examine them, we're going to take them apart, spread them out for you to see, and we're going to look at the cards that are going to be gone post-rotation. That'll be step one. Step one will be we'll identify cards that are about to be rotated out, so cards that deck is going to lose. Then what we'll do after we take those cards is we'll identify the number of slots that we have in the deck that we need to fill. And then after that, what we'll do is we'll examine a set of cards that we know of at this point that will be in the meta post rotation that could possibly be slotted in to replace some of those or could potentially outright change the direction of the deck, not obviously change its ultimate goal, but possibly change how it achieves that goal. So the first deck that we're going to look at here is we're going to look at Yoda, Leia, Mill. What I've done here is, and as I will do for each of these videos, is I've taken one of the iterations of the deck that has performed really well. In this case, I took a regional winning deck from one of the last regionals of the season for the Yoda Leia Mill, and I've taken it out apart. I've spread it out here. Obviously, not all Yoda Leia decks look the same. They're not going to be exactly the same. They're going to be obviously be teched for individual metas and so forth. But I think by and large, this process will ring true. That a lot of the cards that will come out as part of the rotation would have come out in pretty much most of the versions of the deck. That a lot of the cards that you'll see are going to be just pretty standard across the board. In a 30 card deck, probably 25, 26 of them are going to be more or less exactly the same across all versions of the deck. And realistically speaking, it's not going to have, I don't think, too much impact on what we're trying to accomplish here. But for those who are not familiar with this deck, it plays Yoda, it plays the I believe it's Across the Galaxy. Yep, Across the Galaxy, Leia Organa. The purpose of the deck is to use the the discard sides on Leia Organa. Use Yoda special for shields, flips, and discards off the top of the deck. It will take money on occasion, but for the most part, it's just simply trying to gain consistency in hurting the hand and then using Leia's power action as a sort of coup de grace. That power action then allows you to take X number of cards off the top of the deck equal to the value of a character die that it removes. So in a lot of cases, with Leia's power action, it'll hit like the 2 focus or on her, the 2 focus on Yoda, or maybe just settle for one of Yoda's one sides that wasn't cooperating and turning into a special. But either way, what it looks to do is try to hit anywhere from 5 to 7 cards, hopefully, off the top of the deck and around, or not off the top of the deck necessarily, but just out of the opponent's hand and off the top of their deck over the course of a round, and then try to shorten up the game. And then as the game goes along, since your opponent's losing cards, they're losing opportunities for rerolls, losing opportunities to remove your dice, and basically any card that they discard, play, or what have you is essentially 1 life that they're losing in order to do that. And then it basically tries to grind the opponent out and then win by mill. It plays with Occupied City almost by and large. I think almost every version I've seen has played with Occupied City. Occupied City, basically anytime your opponent plays an upgrade or a support, it's going to then mill a card off the top of their deck. So they play an upgrade onto a character, they lose a card off the top of their deck. If they play a support, such as a suppressifier or something, they're going to lose a card. So basically, this is essentially dealing damage to their life. And so The advantage to that is obviously by and large with this deck, what it's trying to do is take what an opponent wants to do, which is try to flood the board with dice and turn it into an advantage for its own, for your deck, basically. In order to try to get this battlefield, it plays with taking ground. Basically, you add 2 to the value of your plot after battlefield roll during setup. Since Yoda essentially has 2 blanks, Leia essentially has 1 blank. You know, your battlefield rolls average somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 for the most part, and then you try to boost it up to 5. And that's so that you can try to choose your battlefield, because you don't care about getting shields, you care about trying to take their life away. So that's basically the gist of what the deck's trying to do. And then, of course, since it is a mill deck, it is essentially a control deck. Really what it's trying to do is just control the opponent. It's not doing any damage really whatsoever. It's trying to use Force Meditation to take cards off the deck, Force Jump, Suppressive Fire, Force Illusion, Overconfidence, Beguiled, Pacify, Hidden Motive, to directly remove dice or mitigate their effects. And then, of course, it tries to take cards off the deck, or try to take cards off hand with Commando Raids, tries to heal up with Field Medics, and so forth. Flames of the Past is kind of its wild cards. It's an attempt to answer things that a control deck would normally be able to answer, such as being able to knock a Vader's Fist off the board. You know, gets one into the discard pile and then removes the other one right off the board. And that's the way it tries to extend its life. It also has a little bit of soft mitigation with the Senate Chamber, using the Senate Chamber's power action to remove one of your dice to turn a die to any side. So it uses that either offensively or defensively, either by turning its own die, say turning Yoda deck to a special, or Leia Organa to a 2-side, and then using that 2-side, or removes one of its own dice just to deal with a problematic opponent's dice that it couldn't otherwise normally deal with, probably because you no longer have any removal in your hand. Another utility card that you see a lot in this deck is EMP grenades in order to deal with vehicle decks. But the EMP grenade has been a real all-star in the last couple of metas due to the fact that it does have a combination of 2 discard for this deck, as well as its special to discard a droid or vehicle. So it can deal with very problematic supports such as the Shadowcaster or the Fire Spray Reset decks and so forth. But even if it's not worried about that, it's not a dead card because it has a 2 discard side. And of course the disrupt sides, while not great, are still helpful because they do keep your opponent off tempo. Now, this particular version of the deck was running with a singleton copy of Determination, allows it to resolve focus dice as something else. Most likely it's simply trying to turn Yoda's 2 focus or Leia Organa's 2 focus into a 2 discard just to surprise the opponent out of nowhere. And then, of course, pretty much every version of this deck is running Hit and Run along with the Commando Raid combo just to roll out Leia, hit a discard side, ratchet, power it up with the Commando Raid, just punch your opponent's hand hard, and your opponent can't do anything about it because they don't have an action. You do that basically with ambush, so you're basically just kind of relying on Leia to hit a discard side if possible. And then, of course, this version is also running Retreat as a way to, in the same vein as Hyperspace, it basically is just trying to end a round early if it gains a significant advantage over its opponent, or say if the opponent's already running a very slower deck that's trying to grind out the round and gain its advantage over the course of a very long round. Retreat's a way for this deck to just really keep tempo and really time walk the opponent. And then, of course, we see here with your standard mitigation package and so forth. But basically, this is what the deck's going to do. It's basically just trying to prevent itself from taking damage and losing a character, while at the same time milling your opponent out. The advantage that this deck has is that in the mill mirror, it's so much faster than most other mill opponents. So this deck is heavily favored if it faces another mill deck. It also is heavily favored against vehicle decks because of the EMP grenade, because of Retreat, and so forth. And Force Jumps also help. But against aggro decks are where it's really going to struggle, but that's why it runs such a heavy package of mitigation including Force Illusions and so forth, and an Overconfidence, and you know, uh, 8 removal cards here as well, just to try to deal with damage and so forth that hit the table. Because realistically, the scouting report on this deck is that if you can knock Leia off the board faster than this deck is comfortable with, you're heavily favored to win that match. And so most opponents are going to do everything they can to knock Leia off the board, because then they will have a significant advantage to try to win the game outright. So keeping that in mind, we'll come back to that point at some point here with some of the selections that I've made for possible card replacements going forward. But Leia is generally considered to be the linchpin of the deck, and her ability is very strong in conjunction with her discard sides. So as I said, so that's kind of essentially the rundown. That's your primer on the deck. So let's take a look here at the cards that are going to go away post-rotation. That's essentially, like we said, step one. So right off the bat, the 2 MVPs of the Awakenings block format, Force Illusion and Force Speed, they go away. Force Illusion came out of the, I believe that's Spirit of Rebellion, I believe. Yeah, I believe it's Spirit of Rebellion, Force Illusion, as well as Force Speed. The Chase Legendary out of Spirit of Rebellion. Force Illusions is such a catch-all damage preventer. You can slap it on the board at any time. It stays there, so even if you get it early, you can just put it on the board and then set it and forget it. Force Speed, of course, allows the deck to, goes on Yoda, Yoda rolls out, and you basically have 3 dice trying to hit a special, which then gives you 2 actions, which again gives you another chance to roll out Leia and resolve a discard side for full value without it being mitigated. So of course these 2 cards, they are unfortunately after rotation going away. Moving on, EMP grenades sadly is also going to go away. I really like this card. I've had my eye on this card since it was released. When it was released, everyone thought that vehicles might be really, really strong, but as it turned out, they didn't get to be strong until the Legacies block. And oddly enough, the Empire War set, which was all about vehicles, that this card came in, really didn't do enough for vehicles. There were a lot of vehicles that did do well following that meta, but a lot of them didn't take off until after Legacies had been released. So unfortunately, EMP grenades will no longer be available for this deck in order to deal with Shadowcasters, Fire Sprays, Umbaran tanks, and the like. So unfortunately, it is also gone. Determination, gone. Overconfidence, one of the best removal cards in the game just because of the fact that it allows you to touch 2 dice, and they can be dice that show any size at the time that they're being touched. Simply for the cost of 1 and spotting a blue character. Really, really strong. It's been an all-star throughout the beginning, the entire run of this game, but once rotation happens, it is also gone. Now, moving down to the bottom row here, these cards are all going to stay, but unfortunately, Commando Raid is gone. Now, Commando Raid may end up being the reason that this deck is no longer viable after rotation. Without Commando Raid's ability to just punch a hand really hard and really strong from basically left field, it's super strong. But the loss of Commando Raid may, my opinion, might be the reason why this deck doesn't survive post rotation. Why after rotation it may simply not be strong enough to compete in the meta. So while Commando Raid really is a really great card, it is going away. Another serious loss for the deck here is Retreat. Like I said before, it, along with EMP grenades, has been a reason why this deck has been able to compete against vehicle decks, Shadowcaster and Fire Spray reset decks. With Retreat going away, this deck may simply not have the ability to deal with decks that go long in the round, vehicle decks, and maybe even other control decks. So Retreat, also gone. Hit and Run, the other part of this of the Commando Raid combo, it is also gone. Hit and Run really was just a facilitator to the Commando Raid tech, so the loss of hit and run may not be devastating for this deck. So we'll watch it go. And then Field Medic, basically, it's in a sense a soft mitigation, allows you to heal 2 from a character for the cost of 1. It's basically one of the cards that allows you to kind of stretch Leia out for as long as possible by healing her for 2. Field Medic, part of the original set, it is going away. So this is what we're left with. We're left with 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 15 cards. So we basically just lost half of the deck to rotation. Every single one of these cards is really strong. It has its place in this deck outright. So we're not going to mess with any of these card slots, I don't think. I think we'll just go ahead and leave them as is. And we're just going to basically look at how do we fill this void right here. And this is a pretty significant void to fill. And is the reason why I'm not necessarily convinced that this deck will be able to survive post-rotation. But as of this moment right now, we haven't even seen, or we've seen about a third of the Convergence set. And part of Allies of Necessity. So once those release, you know, there's very likely to be more cards that might actually help this deck that we don't know of right now. But of course, we don't know what we don't know, and we're simply going to work with the cards that we do know of right now. So this is the stack of cards that I went through that are going to be legal post-rotation. And we're going to take a look at these, and we're gonna talk these out, and I'm going to basically share some thoughts I have, share some ideas on what may or may not happen going forward with this deck, and then we'll just simply kind of lay cards out, and maybe we'll end up forming a deck. I'm not quite sure, of course. We'll just kind of see where this goes. This is definitely the section where if you have any thoughts or comments, criticisms, helpful advice on how to view things, or even if it's just your own crazy opinion, all crazy opinions are going to be welcome about what's going to happen, since, you know, anyone's guess is as good as mine. So leave those in the comments section of this video below. If you like this, if you're liking what you're seeing so far about this video, its format, please like the video, and please subscribe to my channel. I had some new subscribers here the last couple of days, and it's just really great. I'm really enjoying this process of being a content creator, and I really do plan on giving it my all going forward. So please subscribe to my channel so that you're instantly notified of new videos that I put out, and I do plan on putting out as many videos as I possibly can. I will be taking a little more than a week off, starting Friday of this next week. The wife and I are going to be going on a cruise in the Caribbean. So if you want to let me know how jealous you are, you can always leave that in the comments as well. I will feast on your delicious tears and so forth. But yeah, the wife and I, we're going to go on the Caribbean here fairly soon. I'll be gone for a little more than a week doing that, so I won't unfortunately be able to put out any content. But you know, one of the fun things I do plan on doing is, while I'm sipping a Bahama Mama on the Lido deck, is busting up my trusty notebook and possibly thinking about deck ideas. And I'm sure that while my wife is sunbathing and reading, I will likely be thinking about or making a list of other meta decks in order to do more of these kinds of videos and so forth. So, but anyway, enough of that. Let's go ahead and get started here on thinking about what it is that we might be replacing all those cards with. And we're actually going to start, with the Convergence cards. Maybe a little bit backwards to do so, but that's where I kind of would like to start, since that's what's really on everyone's mind right now, are all these new Convergence cards that are coming out. So the first one we're going to look at here is Force Pull. Blue character only. Special, choose an opponent's character and force him to activate it. You may resolve one of that character's character dice as if it were in your pool. What I'm thinking here is that this is something that can go on Yoda, and then you can, as a first action, roll out Yoda, and then you have 3 dice trying to hit a special. And if your opponent still has a character that they haven't activated, you could then special on Force Pull, roll them out, Statistical probability states that more often than not, even if that opponent's character has 2 or 3 damage sides on them, chances are they're both not going to land on damage, which means then that you can just go ahead and remove that die. Now, you essentially are activating your opponent's character for them. I mean, a lot of the downsides of this card have been discussed by other content creators, and I'm not going to, reinvent the wheel here or disagree with them, because a lot of what they said I do completely agree with. But I think in a mill deck, that's not that big of a deal, because what's a big deal is simply removing the damage die. So you activate this, they roll out a character, and then you can remove their best character die. And maybe their best character die ends up being a shield side or a resource side or something. At the very least, what you've done then is you've removed a die that they cannot re-roll into damage, focus into damage, and you've actually been the one to get value out of it. And if it ends up being a shield side or even a 2 shield side, that's actually keeping Leia alive, which is, as we said before, a very important part of this deck. So I think Force Pull is a very strong contender for this particular deck. And one of the additional reasons is, and I'm going to put out a video here pretty soon where I have Force Pull in a mill deck that I'm going to talk about and play a game with. But what I do with Force Pull in that deck, or what I'm planning on doing with it in that deck, is making it so that I roll out Yoda with a Force Pull on it, and even if they have a character that has not been activated, and they can be like, well, you know what, screw your Force Pull, I'm going to activate. Well, that means that that's an upgrade that they didn't get to put out onto that character. Because what Force Pull does, especially once you've got Force Pull down, see, in the first round, is it makes it so that your opponent loses tempo. If they want to prevent the character from being forced out and having its best die removed, they basically have to give up putting an upgrade out in a lot of cases. So it makes your opponent speed up, and it keeps dice off the table potentially, or at the very least pushes them back around. And pushing it back around only helps you. And we're also there's another card that's in here that we'll get to eventually that I think is amazing with Force Pull, and is another reason why I think that Force Pull will be in a redone version of this deck going forward. Next card we're looking at here is Surisu Mastery. Surisu Mastery, you can play it. You get to remove a die showing damage, which is, of course, one thing you want to do. So this card is essentially acting like removal. And then its sides are amazing. If it's a special, you get to remove a die. Otherwise, you have focuses, you have shields, and you have a resource. All important sides for a mill deck. Shields to keep you alive, focus to make your other die sides better, and then, of course, the special to just simply gain a shield and outright remove another damage die. So this is essentially acting as removal on a stick, especially with Yoda when you can chain specials. So we're going to put these two out here because I think they're strong contenders for this deck. In that vein, we have the training version of Surisu. It doesn't have any damage sides either, which we're okay with. It has a focus, shield, resource, and a special. And the special is basically give 2 shields. So at special speed, so special chaining speed with Yoda, you can snap 2 shields onto a character. And then also, if you have Surisu Mastery in hand or in the discard pile, you can actually bring it in for cheap, essentially free. Actually, not essentially, actually for free. And since Surisu Mastery, as we just talked about, is really, really strong, I think in a mill deck, I think like training is an include as well. Next up, we'll look at Sinister Piece. So a Sinister Piece, discard a card from your hand or move a die showing a value of 2 or more. There will be situations where you have a card in hand that just simply isn't doing much for you. So 0 cost removal in a mill deck is, in my opinion, very important. Now, the die you remove does have to show a value of 2 or more, but those are naturally the most dangerous dice for you to be dealing with from your opponent. But it does limit you, because oftentimes maybe the most dangerous dice you're dealing with, or die you're dealing with, is it has a special side on it. So of course a Sinister Piece isn't going to be able to handle that, but I think it's a strong contender as a removal option going forward in this deck. But whether it actually sees play or not, I don't know. I mean, I think the reviews on this card are very much mixed, and I think rightly so. we're just going to have to, this is a card that I think is going to be, let's see what else comes out in the set, let's see what other removal options are out there, and then we'll reevaluate a Sinister Piece, because right now I feel like it's a bubble card. Next up, we'll look at the next 3 cards basically in tandem with each other. So we have Lightsaber Mastery along with the 2 move events that we know about. Whether or not there's more move events that will come out is unclear. I'm not going to rehash what each of these do, because that'll take a little while. But basically, maybe instead of taking ground, you may, maybe going forward, consider playing Lightsaber Mastery. Lightsaber Mastery is a 2-cost plot to replace the taking ground straight up. And then what you can do is you can extend your deck to 32 cards essentially, and be able to, if in a pinch, use Deflecting Slash to remove a ranged or indirect die and activate Yoda all as one action. Or you can use Circle of Shelter as a 0-cost to turn, say, Yoda's 2 focus or Leia's 2 focus or 2 discards into shields in a pinch, just to keep a character alive. And of course, these 2 would basically be sitting off to the side, essentially extending your hand at all times. And the more options you have in a control deck, the better. So that's another possibility of something that, or a direction that this deck might go. And but again, we have more move events that might come out. So, maybe one of the as yet unrevealed move events would be better than one of these 2 for this particular deck. But I simply point it out because I think this is a strong possibility that, say if Occupied City isn't nearly as important, we can get rid of taking ground and we can just play more defense. So then, speaking of defense, we have Heightened Awareness, Ambush, give a character 3 shields, which for a deck like this, just keeping Leia alive is very important. So you can kind of view Heightened Awareness as a pay 2 to stop 3 damage worth from your opponent while getting Ambush. And so you can always use that bonus action to, if you have additional resources, to play another mitigation, such as a 0-cost mitigation, or just using Leia's power action. So you maintain tempo while at the same time kind of soft mitigating some damage dice. Whether or not this goes in or not is unclear. I think if it does go in the deck, it might just simply be a one-of, but we're going to put it into the strong contender status right now. Next card that we're going to look at here is Strength Through Weakness. Discard the top 4 cards of a deck for 3 costs. What this card is doing is directly playing into what this deck is trying to do. It's win condition, but that's all it's doing. And it's doing it for 3 costs, and 3 costs is not insignificant. And whether or not this deck can generate enough resources where it can afford to play this while at the same time doing everything else it needs to do in the course of a round is really unclear. I think for now it's just something to consider, but I think I'm going to put it into the low probability pile of replacements. Next card to look at is Mend. Pay 2, heal 3 damage from a character, or remove 3 damage from a support. Obviously, we're only going to use the first function in this deck. 3 life is 3 life, and just like Heightened Awareness, you're paying 2 to essentially stop 3 damage worth of dice from your opponent. Healing is, in a lot of senses, strictly better than shields, since obviously your opponent can bypass shields. They didn't do a whole lot for you, whereas healing goes directly to the issue. So if Heightened Awareness is a strong contender, I certainly think that Mend is a strong contender as well. Next up we have Crash Landing. Remove a die showing damage, then deal indirect to yourself equal to the value showing on that die. So obviously we're not saving damage in any way. We're still having to take it. But the important thing is that since, as we established before, Leia Organa is really the centerpiece of the deck. She's really the cornerstone of the deck. If she goes down early, then the deck tends to falter. So what Crash Landing does for us is at 0 cost, is remove a die showing damage, and then we can deal that damage where we like. So even if your opponent, say, goes after Yoda first, you can deal it over to Leia. Or if they're trying to go after Leia first, you can deal it to Yoda instead. And basically, it's just about trying to extend. What it also does is it also allows you to put the damage directly into shields, guaranteed, so that your opponent can actually start doing damage to the character. So if you are gaining shields, say from these two cards right here, Crash Landing then is really good for making sure the damage goes on the shields. So if your opponent simply has like one die showing damage, you can Crash Landing it, put the damage on the shields, your opponent takes their action, your action, put more shields on, and you are sitting pretty. So I think that Crash Landing, oddly enough, is a strong contender to go into the deck going forward. Next we have here Scrap Heap. Scrap Heap, after you discard one or more cards from the opponent's deck, exhaust the support to gain 1 resource. This will be a card that it might go in the deck if it seems that in order for this deck to survive in the meta, it needs to generate more resources so that it can do a better job of mitigating, playing out its cards, ramping faster. So we're going to put Scrap Heap in the low probability pile, but it's really more just going to be a deck builder's choice kind of a thing, a meta choice essentially. Next up we have Sound the Alarm. Sound the Alarm, reroll any number of an opponent's dice showing damage. So one of the things that you need to do with a control deck is find any advantage that you can, trying to keep your opponent off damage for as long as possible, because if you keep them off damage, then they have to pitch cards to reroll, and if they're pitching cards to reroll, they're essentially dealing damage themselves to do so, and they're not guaranteed to get that damage back. So Sound the Alarm is a very utilitarian card. If it costs anything other than 0, it just probably wouldn't see a lot of play. But since it costs 0, I think it's one of those cards that until we get more sets out of the new block, I think that Sound the Alarm is going to probably be a very strong contender going forward. So we'll put that in the strong possibility pile. Next up we have Honor Guard. I think that Honor Guard just hasn't seen a lot of play just because of the fact that with the way all the really good removal cards in Awakenings block, this card is just kind of seen as being too slow. It might still end up being considered too slow going forward, but at this point right now, without seeing most of Convergence, we don't know what the removal is going to look like. So anything that's red or blue that can remove damage is going to have to be something that is strongly considered. Alright, so next up we got Medical Droid. Now, this is obviously not necessarily going to be something that is going to be liked by a lot of players, but it's going to be healing on a stick. And I'm going to basically kind of show it in conjunction with several of the cards that we're going to be looking at here. So what we have here essentially are 4 cards that are going to be healing. We lost Field Medic, a nice 1-cost heal 2. It's very utilitarian. So we looked at Mend earlier, and it's pay 2 to get 3 heal and so forth. But if that's going to be too expensive, if we're not going to be playing with Scrap Heap to get additional resources and so forth, we have these 1-cost options. Personally, what I think is going to happen is that you're going to see Medical Droid not get played. But you are going to see Dex's Diner get played almost for sure because it's constant healing. You pay 1, and in the worst shape that the character's in, the more healing you get from it. You're guaranteed 1 heal. But if they've got 6 and more damage on them, they're going to get the heal 2. I've had a lot of very positive experience with this card. I've actually won, probably a half dozen or more games on the back of this card alone. I honestly think that it's going to be a direct replacement for Field Medic going forward. and then it might even be in conjunction with first aid. If opponents continue to believe that killing Leia first is the order of the day, then playing with first aid and its ability to at least heal 2 from her, or 4 if it's the first round of the game, it's a mulligan 4 card in that situation. So I believe that these 2 cards are very much a strong possibility, and because of that, I think we're going to move Mend down to the unlikely pile, just because of the fact that I think you're going to get better value out of these 2. Steadfast will almost undoubtedly simply be a do we need more healing or not, but I'm going to consider that to be an unlikely candidate just because it only moves from a blue character over to, and you know, you moving the damage over to an opponent's not that big of a deal. It's just the fact that you get to heal 1 essentially from Yoda. But again, if Leia continues to be considered the first target, you're going to want first aid, not steadfast. But if that changes, I can see an argument for wanting to have steadfast instead of first aid. But for now, I think we'll consider Leia to probably continue being the bigger threat. But again, that might change. If this package right here ends up being really, really strong, it ends up making it that you're going to put all these on a Yoda early, your opponent might consider Yoda to be the threat first. So that'll just be something that's going to be a meta call as the deck shapes and evolves going forward. We lost Commando Raid to rotation. Probably its next nearest replacement is Motivate. Spot Leia, essentially, to resolve one of your character dice, increasing its value by 1. It's very utilitarian in the sense that you can turn Yoda's focus, 2 focus to 3 focus, so you can essentially set 3 of your dice. Or you can turn Leia's discard or 2 discard into 1 discard more. If that's the case, you essentially get half the value of a Commando Raid, but at cost 0 instead of 1. It's probably fair. But while not a direct replacement, it's probably the next best thing that there is. So we're going to put that into the strong possibility pile. Okay. Here's another kind of oddity that we're going to talk it out, but I mean, whether it seems play or not, hard to say. Change of fate. Choose any number of dice, force an opponent to treat each of those dice the size of their choice. Now, that kind of seems terrible, but the key understanding of this card is that you're forcing them to turn, which means they can't turn it back to the same side. They have to choose a different side. So any die that you choose, if it's on, say, its best side, it's highest damage potential, or it's on its only special side, and the special side is the side that you're worried about, this is a 0 cost soft mitigation. And you don't have to choose all dice. You can choose any number of dice. So if, say, you have, you got Leia on a blank, you can say, I'll choose Yoda, I'll choose Leia. You have to turn her to something relevant now. And since all of her sides are good, you're fine with them turning it to any side. Same way with Yoda. If you land on, say, his disrupt side, which is arguably his worst, you're forcing an opponent to choose either focus, which is not good for them, the 2 specials, very terrible for them, the shield or the discard. The discard plays directly to your win condition, and the shield plays directly to either protecting your characters or even being used by Leia's power action. So I think this card has potential. The fact that the problem will be is that it'll probably be considered to be too unpredictable and too unwieldy for high competitive play. But if you want to test something out at a local or something, a friendly kitchen table game, this is something to consider. I mean, we're going to put it in the low probability pile for now, but you know, like I said, we're just talking things out. We're opening up our minds. We're theory crafting. Okay, so this is where we get a little spicy with how we're thinking. We've moved on from a low spicy thought to a potentially high spicy thought. Home turf advantage. Bring 2 battlefields to the game. During setup, if your battlefield will be chosen for the game, you choose one of your 2 battlefields instead, set the other one aside. So what this does is it's going to be a direct replacement for taking ground. at the 2 cost. Okay. What it allows us to do is be very interesting and maybe give our opponent no good option, and they're basically forced to choose their own if they win the battlefield. But if you win the battlefield roll, you choose yours, you have options, and if you win the battlefield roll, you can choose a battlefield that maybe better suits the matchup that you're playing. So this is what I'm thinking. With home turf advantage, if you win the battlefield roll, and you bring these 2 battlefields, Occupied City is really good against slower decks because you're fast. So you choose Occupied City if you're playing against a vehicle deck, another mill deck that's slower than you, or something along those lines. But if you're facing a heavy aggro deck, say you roll out Leia, you hit her 2 discard side, your opponent does something, they're now down to 3 cards, and they don't have any damage sides on the board. You could choose Comm Tower, you could claim Comm Tower, and then you could basically just resolve Leia for the +1. You essentially get the Motivate on a stick. So against a heavy aggro deck where you're like, you're in a situation where, you know, you hit the 2 discard side or what have you, and it's just really, really good, and you're willing to let the rest of the round go because your opponent's not going to deal any damage to you, you can claim Comm Tower, make him pitch 3. Say you're in a situation late in the round, and you desperately need 2 shields, but you only got 1 shield showing, you claim, you get 2 shields, and so forth. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of possibilities, there's a lot of gamesmanship there, but what happens is with home turf advantage in these 2 battlefields is that you have the options. You have options. You can either play the battlefield or the other battlefield depending on the matchup, and I think there could be something here. Obviously, much better, much smarter players could figure something else out, but this is just something that came to mind. So we'll go ahead and set that over here for right now. All right, Bewilder. Spot Yoda, essentially, to reroll an opponent's character die and then discard cards at the top of their deck equal to the value showing on that die. So what we get with Bewilder is twofold. We get a piece of soft mitigation where a character die that landed on its best side, we can re-roll. And then it's essentially a win-win for us. If it lands on that terrible side for us again, chances are it's a high-value die, and they lose 3 cards off the top of their deck. If it lands on a different side, probably like a non-damage side, we've kept them off damage, at least for a little bit. We've also milled a card off the top of their deck, and if they want to get it back on damage, they're probably going to have to pitch to reroll. So essentially, you get another discard out of them because of it. So, you know, just to kind of use an example, opponent rolls out Qui-Gon, for example, the newer Qui-Gon, and hits, say, the 2 melee side, which is essentially a 3 melee side because he has 2 shields on him. You know, you could bewilder that die, and now if he hits damage, you're either going to mill 2, mill 3, or if he hits one of the non-damage sides, you're going to mill 2. Sorry, you're going to mill potentially 3, mill potentially 3, mill potentially 2, and you've kept him off damage. So there's a lot of potential value here in Bewilder, and I think this is probably a card that you're going to definitely see in this deck going forward. So we're going to put that here, I think. Next up, we have Repulse. Choose 2 dice that are different colors and remove those dice. This is a guaranteed removal because we have dice of different colors. So at the very least, even if your opponent's playing mono blue or they're playing mono red, you can put the other color into the pool, and you can use Repulse. The problem with this card is that if your opponent's only playing monocolor, you're going to have to remove one of your die to remove one of their die, and at 2 cost, that seems like really poor value. But if your opponent is using dice of different colors, 2 removal for 2 cost is really good. So the jury is definitely going to be out on this one. This is one that we'll see play if removal options aren't good for a little while. But I think if removal options are at least decent at any point going forward, this card's not going to see play. So we'll put this into the low probability pile. Okay. Counterstroke. Blue character only. If opponent deals damage to the attached character, you may resolve this dice, increasing its value by 1. Now, I think this is probably going to end up being a low probability option, but what we see here is that we put this on Yoda. Yoda rolls out early, and if we land on the focus, the shield, or the discard, if they want to deal damage to Yoda, you're going to get more value out of this card. So in a sense, it kind of keeps people off of damaging Yoda, possibly. Say you land on the discard side, they're not going to want to damage Yoda. But if your opponent's playing with indirect damage, you only have to assign the 1 damage it gets dealt. So you can just assign 1 damage to Yoda, resolve this die for an increased value, which may end up being clutch. You could possibly get the 2 focus out of it or the 2 shields out of it, and that might be important. Say Yoda has 2 shields on him, and the opponent has 3 indirect. They resolve that 3 indirect. You take a shield off. You take a shield off. He takes 1 damage. You put 2 shields back on, without even taking an action. So there's possibility here. There's possibility here with Counterstroke, but it'll remain to be seen how important this is. And even if it goes in, I think this may end up only being a one-off option. Now here's a couple options that I consider to be fringe. If you control the battlefield, spot a red character to turn a die to any side. So at the very least, we can spend 1, we can turn a die to a side, and we can use that offensively or defensively. So we could always turn Yoda to the special if we need to, but we have to control the battlefield. Now we're probably not going to be able to spot a vehicle or spot a mod to do any removals, but you know, there's always the possibility that a vehicle comes out that actually is a good mill deck vehicle, and if that's the case, there's always the possibility that Aerial Advantage can see play that way. But for now, low probability. Next up, we have Generous Blaster. After you activate the attached character, you may reroll this die or discard the top card of a deck. And it does have a discard side and has a shield side, but at 3 cost, you are getting discard on a stick, so you are pretty much guaranteeing that you're going to be able to discard a card repeatedly once this is in play, because it does have redeploy. So no matter who you put it on, it's going to stay out there until the game's over. Whether or not that ends up being important or not, kind of hard to see, remains to be seen, but this might make it in as a one-of. Next up, we have Add Odds. Remove a die showing a value that is an odd number that you can place this event on the bottom of your deck. This will be important removal in a mirror match. So if mill decks end up being strong going forward, I can see this easily being a 2-of, just so that you can potentially try to win that mill match, or the mill mirror match. So we'll put this into the strong possibility pile. Next up, we have Conflicted. Reroll one of your blue character dice, and if that die just rolled damage, deal 2, otherwise give a character 2 shields. This card basically reads, reroll a Yoda die, you won't hit damage, you will give a character 2 shields. So if Yoda ends up on, say, his shield side or disrupt side, and you don't want it there, it's essentially a free reroll, and you're going to put 2 shields on a character. So what I would say is that this is a very strong card for the deck, but it may just simply not make the 30. So that's kind of probably where this card ends up at. Getting down to the last 4 here. You were my friend. Turn a character die to any side. If you have more blue cards play than that opponent, you may remove a die. So just like Aerial Advantage, we can just use this offensively. We can literally just turn one of our character die to any side. But we can use it defensively in the sense that if we have more blue cards than the opponent, we can remove that die. Character die, of course. So this has dual function as being both offensive, guaranteed, and a much stronger defensive possibility than Aerial Advantage. But the difference here is that Aerial Advantage could touch any die. You or my friend can only touch a character die. So definitely questionable. No questions asked. Spot Yoda and give an opponent up to 3 of your resources to remove that many dice. If you're fighting on your battlefield, draw that many cards. This can be a blowout removal, but you have to be comfortable with your opponent getting that many resources, which could end up being a problem if that ramps them into whatever it is they need to win the game. But if you have the resources, you could spend 3 to remove 3, and that could end up saving you. So this card, I think, has possibilities, especially since you get to draw cards if you play on your battlefield, which may end up drawing you into an additional piece of removal, or dig you even deeper to find your flames of the past or something. So I think this is a strong possibility, but it really does remain to be seen. Okay, let's look at this one first, actually. Snuff out, only if you control the battlefield, remove all dice showing damage. This will be one-sided. You have no dice showing damage. So therefore, this can only hurt your opponent. So if your opponent runs hot, if they roll out, they hit a bunch of damage on a character, it's 2 costs to remove all of them. How often that's going to happen is probably not often, but this could be a butt-saving card. For that reason alone, the fact that it's guaranteed to be one-sided and could potentially be a butt-saving blowout, we'll put it in the strong possibility, but I really only ever see it being a one of in a deck, because you have to control the battlefield and it does cost 2. Okay, our last card, and I'm saving the most interesting thought for last, I think, here. So we looked at earlier all of these cards up here, these abilities, these blue abilities. What I'm thinking is that getting dice off the board is strong when you're a control deck. Permanently getting it off the board, making your opponent pay the resources to put it on the board, and then just flat out taking it away from them entirely. Early on in this game, we saw how strong Imperial Inspection was. We saw how strong, what's that, the red removal that you just spot a red character, cost 3, but it's cost 3, spot a red character, and literally make them discard a weapon. It's strong because your opponents invested the resources and then they just lose it permanently. So what I think is that going forward, Shatterpoint's going to be an absolute necessity to get this deck to run, because of the fact that going forward, especially early on in the meta, you're going to see aggro decks probably being what wins early on, because that's almost always the way it goes in a new meta. And so I think that if this kind of control deck is going to have any possibility of being viable early on in the new meta, Shatterpoint's going to have to be a key piece of it. You can put it on Yoda, and then you can put your Force Meditation, your Force Jump, any of these other blue abilities here onto Yoda, and then you can feel pretty confident that you're going to be able to blow up a 2 or even 3 cost upgrade. And the spiciest thought in my mind is the fact that it says equipment or weapon, and weapon can be one of the mods that is going on your opponent's support ship. So Arccaster, triple laser turret, these are all weapon upgrades. They say upgrade, weapon, mod. So they are targetable by Shatterpoint. So I think this is going to be a key piece of defense and removal going forward, because we've lost the ability to end a round early with retreat and so forth. I think Shatterpoint is going to have to be its direct replacement, which means that in order to make sure that we get it going and it gets going at a high enough ability, enough ability dice in the pool, you're going to have to run with this little grouping right here. So in my personal opinion, this right here is going to what you're almost undoubtedly going to see in this deck going forward. And then whether or not any of this other stuff makes it in is, of course, will be up to the deck builder. But I think this is going to have to be the starting point for this deck going forward. And if that's the case, what we're looking at is 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, 23. You'll have 7 cards with which to play with out of probably this group right here. And then, of course, plus or minus whatever it is that is yet unrevealed out of Convergence and Allies of Necessity. But, I mean, that's everything. This is what I've examined so far. This is what I think. This is the theory crafting that I have done so far with this deck. Please tell me what you think about everything in the comments section. Please like the video if you like it. Please let me know if you really like this. I'm definitely excited to see more theory crafting videos going forward. And then, of course, subscribe to my channel if you do, because in that way you'll be notified instantly once I post them. So, yeah, I think this is the possible future of Yoda and Leia Mill. Again, thanks for watching, and have a good rest of your day.